All right, good morning. Welcome to the Dean's Forum at St. John's Cathedral. My name is Patrick Lannon. I'm the Director of Stewardship and Communications. You'll notice Dean Richard is away this morning for a wonderful reason. His daughter, Adeline, was married last night here at the Cathedral, so be sure whenever you see the Lawsons next to congratulate them, and such an exciting day for them. So he is out. He will be back next week and be in conversation with Cantor Liz Sachs. So we are excited to have Liz Sachs with us this morning, a returning guest. Yeah, a few times, right?
Yeah. This is great. It feels almost like home.
Yeah. So just some details for you all to know about Liz Sachs. Liz is a graduate of Harvard University with a bachelor's studying Jewish studies and music. Went on to Hebrew Union Institute, and is that Cincinnati?
I was in
New York. Okay. I'm from the Midwest, and
I've
yeah.
been to the Cincinnati campus.
Okay.
Great chili, great ice cream. That's
Yeah.
what I know.
Great.
So
And then was ordained as a cantor in 2007, served at Central Synagogue in New York, a place with a storied history, before coming here in 2012, was it? Great. And exciting detail, she's currently senior cantor, but on July 1 will become senior rabbi at Temple Emmanuel. And many of you will know this, and I know Dean Richard will talk about this next week, but of course, St. John's and Temple Emmanuel have a long history of interfaith dialogue and learning from one another. So we're excited to have Liz with us again. And I think it's helpful to note we're bookending our Dean's Forum. We started in the fall with Dr. Adam Gregerman, a scholar of Second Temple Judaism, and now we're looking at Jewish understandings of the resurrection. And so they are all master's level students, so hold nothing back, go at it, and the final exam will be at the Dean's Forum next week. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here again. Thank you so much. I hope, in reference to you all being master students, that no one is immediately petrified by the 12 pages of sources that I have just handed out. I promise we're going to be a little bit choosy in this presentation, but really because I know how seriously we take text in this space and how much we like to be able to think about it in relationship to holy texts that are held here, that I wanted to make sure you had a nice variety, such that if you wanted to go home and continue the learning on your own, you are welcome to do so. On the last page of the source packet, there's also a bibliography for some further reading around Jewish afterlife and resurrection. I'm going to talk about some of the distinctions in that as well. Also, just know I'm going to start right from the beginning by saying if you have any questions, first of all, during the course of the presentation, I'm really not formal or strict about presentation and Q&A. I hope it really is a conversation. I will frame and we'll go through some text, but I really do want us to have back and forth the whole time. If you have big questions that you want to save for the end, you are more than welcome to do that as well. And I hope you know that I'm always available, even beyond today and next week. If you have questions, if you are interested in further learning on this topic and would like to have a conversation, please do not hesitate to contact me. All my information is on the website at Temple Emmanuel, and I love doing this. This is like my total geeky side of myself that I don't get to do as much when I teach 13-year-olds on a regular basis. Although I will say their questions about the afterlife are unending. So I do talk about that a little bit. Okay. So this conversation that we're going to have today is actually a little bit of a continuation of a conversation that I started when I came last year and talked a little bit about the idea of resurrection and Second Temple text and how Judaism lived in that era with the emerging Christian understanding. So in a certain way, this topic is back by popular demand, which I think fits very well with our subject matter here this morning. Here's what I'm going to remind us, is that when we're talking about these issues in the Jewish universe, we actually are engaging in a little bit of a mess of three ideas that get conflated and confused consistently. So what are the three ideas? Idea number one is afterlife. And what is the afterlife for everyone? Right? That is kind of the biggest first question. And when I say everyone, I really mean everyone. People who identify as part of the Jewish faith, the rest of humanity, which gets divided up in various ways, which you'll see in some of the sources. So that's question number one, right? And that is, from the beginning of time, for everybody, will always be. What happens to us after we die? Period. That's question number one. Question number two, or topic number two, is this idea of resurrection, which is slowly embedded in our biblical text and then in later Jewish text, particularly in the Second Temple and then through into the medieval time period. And sometimes in Jewish text also is read anachronistically back into the Bible. But the idea of resurrection, and for whom and when. So that is a big question that we see in our text, which is distinct from afterlife. They have touch points with each other and intersections, but they're not the same. And then the third question is messianic age. And all three, and we absolutely believe that there will be one. Lots and lots of debate about when it's going to happen, by whom is it going to come around, and what does that mean for us and the world, right? Who gets it? So those are three distinct topics in the Jewish tradition. They get overlapped, but they are not necessarily connected by a straight through line. And that's important to understand when you're looking at these texts. And part of the reason that that's true, and this is why we're going to start where we're going to start, is that it was not an original concept for the Jewish tradition, which starts as an ancient Near Eastern tradition. And as you'll see as we go through the text somewhat chronologically, the idea of developed afterlife, and whatever that means, whether it's one place or two places or three places or no places, we're not exactly sure. That only comes in much later, as the Jewish tradition moves from being ancient Israelite cultic tradition, which is how we start, into being Jewish tradition in diaspora, which means we are in conversation with many other religious traditions. Zoroastrianism, Hellenism, right? All kinds of other stuff starts to seep in. And when you have a tradition that is as old as we are, it is natural that you're going to pick up a few things along the way and then try to figure out how it fits into your evolving worldview. And so that's what I just want you all to remember. That is not so different from a lot of religious traditions, but there was no original intentionality to answer this question. It was not part of original doctrine, whatever you want to imagine that might have been for ancient Israelite cult, because that is not what ancient Israelite cultic practice did not think of itself as a distinct religion. That's like a whole other class that we could talk about. There's a fantastic book, I may have mentioned it last time I was here, by a woman named Leora Botnitsky. She's a professor of religion at Princeton. And she wrote a book called How Judaism Became a Religion. And it really explores the shift from being an ancient culture filled with Near Eastern practice and westernizing itself into the understanding of what religion is, and then trying to figure out, what are we? Are we a religion? Are we a people? Are we a culture? Are we an ethnicity? And the answer in the good Jewish tradition is yes. And then that gets a little bit complicated. But we're going to look at this through the lens of this particular topic. And we're going to start right from page 1. And I'll probably ask as we go through if people would like to share, to read one of the sources that we're looking at. We're not going to read every single source. Some of them are purposefully redundant. They add a little bit of depth or shade on something that we're going to lift. But just so that you have it, I have put many things in here. So it is always good to start right at the beginning. So who would like to read our very first text from Genesis? Oh, thank you. Great.
"34. All Jacob's sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, 'No, I will go down mourning to my son in Sheol. My son must not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If he meets with disaster on the journey that you are taking, you will send my white head down to Sheol in grief.'"
Okay. So just reading that text cold for 1 second. First of all, biblical context. What story are we in? What's happening? Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat is happening right now, live in our Bible. The context of what's happening is that Jacob is bereft because he thinks his son is dead. That's the first sentence. And he is talking about how he will die. He, Jacob, will die with this mourning in his heart. And where's he going to go? What does the text tell us? Someplace named Sheol, which we really don't know a whole lot about. And this is one of the first times that it is identified as an actual place. When Abraham dies, he says, or the Torah says, actually, the text says he was gathered to his ancestors, doesn't actually designate it as a place. Same thing with Isaac. When we get to Jacob, all of a sudden, there's a place, and it's called Sheol. And what's the imagery that's associated with Sheol? Where is it? Well, directionally, before we get to hell, where is it? Like, okay, right. Yeah, this is called literal text reading. It's down. It's somewhere down there. Putting aside what we know gets later put on top of the imagery of up versus down, why do you think someone might associate afterlife with down? Because we bury people in the ground. Right. We go down, literally. And so that's a very common concept in lots of traditions, that any version of an afterlife, any version of an afterworld is down. And in the ancient world in particular, that carries no judgment. There's no quality to down in the ancient world. It's just not here. It's elsewhere. And elsewhere that you can't see. In a way that even though up is also mystifying, you can kind of see the sky. And you have a sense of more up than down. And so when you look at this text, all of a sudden, you are seeing this place called Sheol exists in the Bible, exists in the Torah, and there's some sense of Jacob is going to go somewhere after he dies. That's also an interesting concept, that he is conscious of the fact that he's going to go somewhere after he dies. We pick up a lot of that and start to get a character of what Sheol is as we move through the rest of the Bible. So let's look at this text from Job. We're going to skip Samuel for right now, and we're going to look at the text from Job, which is, of course, in good Job fashion, not at all dramatic. So who would like to read text from Job? Thank you.
Job 3:11-19. Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? For now would I be lying in repose, asleep, and at rest in Sheol, with the world's kings and counselors who rebuild ruins for themselves, or with nobles who possess gold and who fill their houses with silver? Or why was I not like a buried stillbirth, like babies who never saw the light? There in Sheol the wicked cease from troubling. There rest those whose strength is spent, prisoners who wholly at ease. They do not hear the taskmaster's voice. Small and great alike are there, and the slave is free of his master.
Great, thank you so much. So according to Job, who goes to Sheol? Everybody. Good place, bad place, seems relatively neutral, maybe neutral leaning good, right? Everyone is at ease. There's rest, there's repose, there's freedom from the taskmaster. So there's this sense that there is some other place, everybody gets to go there, doesn't seem to be dependent on moral character of any kind, which is really interesting in the book of Job in particular. But there is this notion that there's one place, and that's where all the souls go. And then we get to Ecclesiastes, and in Ecclesiastes' eternal optimism, he says, if anyone would like to read Ecclesiastes, it's short. This one's really short. I'm sorry, you're going to get a workout. I apologize. It's good getting steps in for the morning. And then, Mike, you can do the next one.
Whatever it is in your power to do, do with all your might. For there is no action, no reasoning, no learning, no wisdom in Sheol, where you are going.
Okay, well, that feels a little bit different. So how is Ecclesiastes, how is Kohelet in Hebrew characterizing this not here world? Yeah, right. And nothingness, right? That is a huge theme in Ecclesiastes, right? Hevel havalim, nothingness. Everything is vanity. Unfortunately for Ecclesiastes, it sounds like he feels that way both in this world and in the world to come. But you start to get this sense that, maybe not everyone thinks the next world is peachy. Maybe there may be something that we have to be worried about. Why do you think that might start to creep in? Like, what's the value of assigning value to an afterlife in either direction? What does that do to us here? Okay, tell me more what you mean by that. Yeah. Yeah, right? It can be a motivator, right? A motivator in either direction, also an equalizer, right? So we can think about, which is an interesting thing to think about if we're starting to equate afterlife with a perfect world, and we have a sense of democracy and democratization already around perfect world. What does that tell us about what systems we're setting up in this world? Whole other conversation. Not everyone agrees that it's in total democracy or an equalizer in the afterlife. We'll see that in some text coming up really quickly. But what I'm lifting from the biblical period is that it's really vague. There's some sense of a thing. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about it. These texts that I'm bringing you are not just few of many. They're really like some of the only. We don't hang out in this concept in the Bible. A lot of what the Bible does is think about how we're supposed to behave in this world, right? Proverbs is filled with texts that talk about the wicked being punished in this world and the righteous flourishing in this world, which of course creates great chaos when you look around and realize that's not quite true. And that's the whole conceit of the book of Job to begin with. But that is the primary project, I would say, of the Jewish Bible is there reason in this world? How does it work? When we start to introduce afterlife, then we have a whole other formula that we have to start to calculate. Then it's not just about this world. Then it's about, there's more stuff, which in and of itself can help address some of the total hypocrisy of this world, which is a big reason that we start talking about afterlife with moral character. Because if you can't figure out why righteous people suffer in this world, it's very helpful to have another world in which they won't. It really brings great pastoral comfort. And I don't mean it sarcastically, I mean it genuinely. From a compassion perspective, it is human to want to imagine that those who have hard lives in this world will not feel that way forever, that there will be respite. And that is a big piece of why we start talking about something that looks a little bit different. So we move forward. Let's turn to page 2. Okay, actually, I'm sorry. We're going to do one quick thing on the bottom of page 1. So before we actually get to the rabbinic period, where we really get into the afterlife, we're just going to look at the quick, I'll read these for a second, the quick hints of resurrection in the prophets. Right? And the prophets already is the middle of the Jewish Bible. We've got the Torah, we have the prophets, we have the writings. So right smack in the middle, and in First Temple period, we have conversation about the idea that death is not final. Okay, so we're starting to add in complexity. First, there was a place that we go, some sense, after we die, but now we may not be there forever. Now we may come back somehow. And Isaiah very famously says, right, your dead, talking to God, your dead shall live, my dead bodies shall arise, and the earth shall bring life to the shades. Right, that there be some sense of things returning. And then, of course, in Ezekiel and Yechezkel, when we talk about the dry bones, right, thus says Adonai God, behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves. Okay, so just for a second to start to see the parallel tracks that are emerging. When we're talking about resurrection in the prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel, who is being resurrected? A little bit unclear exactly who it is, but more than just one person, right? Lots and lots and lots of people. Probably we're talking about Israel, although we're going to see that eventually we learn that maybe not just Israel, maybe everybody, or sections of everybody, but a whole group of people. And here, also, no sense of good people, bad people, meh people, everybody. Everybody will, and who is doing the resurrecting? God. God is doing the resurrecting, which will also become a big theme. So now let's look at page 2. So we're moving forward in time, and we're going to take a look at a particular text that emerges from a scholar and a historian named Josephus. Are we familiar with Josephus in this room? Ish. Right, a historian. It's actually where we get most of our information about Second Temple Judaism to begin with, that is directly written as history and not inferred from text. Is Josephus, who's describing what he's seeing around him. And Josephus is lifting different sects of Judaism that think differently about afterlife and resurrection. And so we're already starting to get a sense of sectarianism around this issue in particular. So when we look at Josephus, he's lifting that there are, in this paragraph, he's talking about 3 main sects, which I think might be familiar to most of you, which are Essenes, Pharisees, Sadducees. They're our main characters in Second Temple Judaism. They think really different things. They really don't like each other. And they're constantly fighting for political hegemony. And as part of the reason that the Second Temple period ends in the chaos that it does is because of the 3 Second Temple sects really trying to outdo each other and form better alliances with government or form no alliances with government, right? They make different choices, and they're constantly promoting themselves to the Jewish community about what is the truth, what is the true way to be. And so in this particular moment, Josephus is telling us that according to the Essenes, souls are immortal. We're starting to get a body-soul divide now. In the Bible, in Sheol, everything goes. There's no sense of differentiation. And even in the prophets, Ezekiel and Isaiah don't get into like what's going to be resurrected, like my foot or my soul or what exactly is going to happen. And as you can see, when we're going to get to some of our later texts, massive conversation about what resurrection looks like, literally looks like. Are we going to be skeletons walking around? Are we going to be resurrected at our best moment of life, at our last moment of life? Is there healing possible for resurrected bodies? It's a lot. But here is the first time we get this sense that there's a body and soul divide, and that the souls are immortal while the body is not. And that's a big piece for the Essenes. And then Josephus actually blatantly lifts that this is likely pulled from the Greeks and from their philosophy of what does it mean for us to be body and soul, for us to exist in some other way than just our physical selves, which has not existed in the Jewish tradition until this moment, really at all. And then we have the Pharisees. Okay, the Pharisees, God bless them, say, all souls are incorruptible, but the souls of good men only are removed into other bodies, but the souls of bad men are subject to eternal punishment. Everything about the Pharisees is about judgment, and good people get good things and bad people get bad things. And as you read through a lot of Pharisaic text, you start to realize that good people equals people who agree with the Pharisees. That's what they're talking about, which is part of the political hegemony, is that if you follow law in the way they would like you to follow law, you have fulfilled your obligation of being in this world, and therefore you get reward. And if you don't, you very much don't. And so there we start to get into judgment. And the Sadducees, who are a little bit more Torah literal, generally speaking, that's their flavor. They say there is no immortal duration of the soul. That's it. We're done. Nothing exists after this life. Everything that happens in this world is our doing. We make good choices, we make bad choices, and then it's over. Now, each of these positions, if we had a little bit longer, we could debate about why would you take it? Like, why would you hold it? What's the benefit of holding each one of these positions? What questions does it answer for you in terms of how you're living and what you're doing, and what might be a reason that a whole community would do that? But just for a second, if we were going to pause it, why might it be useful to think that our souls are immortal but our bodies are not? What do you guys think? We see what happens to bodies. That's right. Right? I'm not sure that everyone really wants to think about their physicality lasting forever. Because also remember that today we are in an age of tremendous health compared to what it was in the Second Temple, and people were living with all kinds of awful pain and affliction. And I think this idea of some essence of you that is not what is hurting you or killing you or keeping you from doing what you want to be doing, that's a very tempting idea. And that's the part that gets to be immortal and not anything else that is hurting you. In terms of the Pharisaic position, if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad, right? That is a very tempting moral code. Nice and easy for motivation. Is the way we start, right, developmentally with young children. Pretty easy. My 7-year-old is sitting in the back staring at me right now. And then when we think about the Sadducees, why would they take a position that none of this happens? Yeah.
Important is what happens now here and how we act now.
Right. It gives us a little bit more urgency. That, like, we have to do it now, and we must not get obsessed with what happens later, which we know a whole lot about or we know very little about in terms of the world to come. Nothing. We know nothing about. One of the rabbis that I work with, a rabbi emeritus of Temple Emmanuel, his name is Stephen Foster. Some of you may have encountered him before. When he teaches about death and the afterlife, he always says, everyone asks me what the Jewish afterlife is going to be like, and I tell you that I don't know because I haven't been there and I'm not in a hurry to find out. And that's kind of where we are with the Sadducees' position. Like, this is not our problem. We can't understand it, therefore it doesn't exist. So that is where we start in the Second Temple period. And then we start to develop into rabbinic literature. So just historical time check for a second. When we're talking about rabbinic literature, Mishnah and Talmud, which is where we're going to live for the next 5 minutes or so, we're really talking about 200 CE to 800 CE. That's where we are. Not medieval yet. We haven't quite hit, we're starting to get there at the very end. But when I say 800 CE, we're really talking about redaction at that point, not so much creation of original material. Most of the development of the Talmud, right, Mishnah is codified around 250 CE. So it has been in oral development and then written development from 0 until 250 CE. And then Talmud, which is explication on the Mishnah. Right, there are 6 orders of the Mishnah, 6 volumes of Mishnah, and 66 volumes of Talmud. So yes, we like to talk a lot. And that's all going on 200 to 800, essentially. So that's where we are. And a lot of stuff is happening in the Jewish community, 200 to 800. Right, the temple is destroyed in 70 CE, which is AD, 70, but we don't actually get fully dispersed until 157, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, when the last martyrs make one last attempt to overturn the Romans, and then a huge percentage of the Jewish community is sent outside of what is then called Palestine. That is... that's really the beginning of essential diaspora, but remembering that there is a core that didn't leave. And that's why if someone is talking to you about 2 Talmuds, there's a Jerusalem Talmud and a Babylonian Talmud, because the exegesis of the Mishnah, which is all original to the land of Israel, continues in both places. And so that's why we have 2 different Talmuds. And the character of each Talmud is very much representative of the character of the Jewish community that's happening in Babylonia versus the character of the Jewish community that's happening in the land of Israel. Almost every text that I have brought for you today that comes from the Talmud comes from the Babylonian Talmud. It is the dominant Talmud for a lot of reasons. It is bigger. It gets published earlier, it is easier to understand, and it represents more of the Jewish community. And so that's when anything that comes from Talmud, which is what you're going to see when I say things like Brachot 28b on page 3, or Eruvin 19a, those are all Talmudic orders. But okay, we start in the rabbinic period. We've established something happens after we die. We've established that maybe there's a concept of resurrection. And now, all of a sudden, at the very beginning of this Talmudic period, we get another idea. So Bereshit Rabbah 1:10, which I'm just going to read for time, says, Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi explained the creation story according to Bar Kapara, who's another guy. Why was the world created with the letter Bet, which is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Torah begins Breshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created. So why start with the letter Bet? If you're going to start the Torah, why not start with the letter Aleph? It would seem to make sense to start the whole text with the first letter of the alphabet, but we do it with the second. And it says to teach you that there are two worlds, this world and the world to come. Not Sheol, Olam Haba. And thus the idea of the world to come is born. Really unclear what that is. Don't help us very much. They just say it. There's another world. It's coming. And then we start to debate who goes there. And when we start to debate who goes there, we get a sense of what it is. So in Mishnah Sanhedrin, on the bottom of page 2, it says, all Jews have a share in the world to come. So who gets to go there? All the Jewish people, everybody. And yet, because every good rule has an exception, except for these people. These, if you look down like 2/3 of the way down the paragraph, these do not have a share in the world to come, even though we just said everybody does. Who doesn't get to go into the world to come? One who says that there is no resurrection according to the Torah. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. One who says that the Torah is not from heaven, an apostate or a heretic. And then Rabbi Akiva helpfully adds, one who reads non-Jewish philosophy or religious text for practice and belief, not merely for interest or scholarship. One who utters an incantation over a wound, which is a euphemism for engages in sorcery and superstition. And Abba Shaul says, also one who says the name of God out loud, as it is supposed to be, as is it actually written. Okay, so who ends up not getting into this ambiguous world? Lots of people, and particular people who are not rule followers. People who are not rule followers, who operate kind of outside the margins of what we're supposed to do as part of our community. Now keep in mind, I think this is true in lots of religious texts, that anytime a text says that, it means that lots of people are doing it. So many people are doing it that they have to lift it and say, this is not okay. If not very many people were doing it, it wouldn't end up in this text. It's not like they're creating a preemptive prohibition. This means it's happening, and they're drawing lines, which makes sense in a diaspora context, because all we're doing is living amongst people who have different traditions than we do. And people are trying things on and trying things out and figuring out how they make meaning in their life. And the Talmud is petrified because it takes away centralization of power and centralization of community. So particularly around this issue, what's really interesting is that when we get to Mishnah Sanhedrin, I think you also all know that in the war of the Jewish sects, which of the Jewish sects wins? The Pharisees. The Pharisees win. And every piece of rabbinic Judaism moving post-Second Temple history is Pharisaic Judaism. So that's what we live today. Maybe except for some Near Eastern Jewish sects who did not have that kind of Second Temple division, but that is generally what we do. And so you can imagine those who do not have a share in the world to come, one who says there is no resurrection according to the Torah. Who were those people again? The Sadducees, who were the Pharisees' sworn enemies. And so now they're really making some lines. We win. Our position is primary. If you don't believe in resurrection of some kind, you are not part of the real group. Okay. Then we start to push on the question of just Jews or other people. So let's look at the top of page 3. And in another Talmudic text, at the very end of this top paragraph, it says, it's It's going through all of this. The wicked go one place, and the righteous go another place. But behold, there must be righteous ones among the non-Jewish nations. That's what goyim means. It's become a pejorative, but it really isn't in the Talmud. It's really just a description of, it's a catch-all for not Israelite. That's what it means. Behold, there must be righteous ones among the goyim who have a share in the world to come. What are we starting to see a little bit here? What do we think? We're starting to open our community a tiny bit, right? Some sense that, maybe not just the Jewish community does good things in this world. Maybe we share worldview in some way with some other people. And if we're talking about end of days, probably they should get to come too. And so we start to get that idea. And so in this very beginning, we've posited the idea of Olam Haba, of this next world. We've started to think about who gets to go there and who doesn't get to go there. And then we're actually going to go into, I want to turn to page 4. And all of these texts are descriptions of what is Olam Haba. What is it like? Who gets to go there? And the consistent message in every one of these texts is people who follow the rules get to go to Olam Haba, and people who don't go somewhere else. We haven't really defined somewhere else yet until we get to here. And so we're finishing up on page 4. We're looking at Brachot 17a, right in the middle of page 4. And it's saying, what is this world to come? Well, in the world to come, there is no eating, no drinking, no procreation, no commerce, no envy, no hatred, no rivalry. The righteous sit with their crowns on their heads and enjoy the radiance of divine presence. It is a disembodied world. Very much about our souls and not about our physical selves. And that's what this other perfect world is. So I want you to hold that image in your mind for a second and now turn to page 5. And on page 5, we get all the descriptions of the other place, which is not currently described as Olam Haba. So we look at the very top of page 5. It says, in Rosh Hashanah 16b, there's a debate. Beit Shammai says, holy righteous people will immediately be written and sealed for eternal life at the end of days. Holy wicked people will immediately be written and sealed for Gehinnom. Or if you may have heard some people call it Gehinna, which is the Ashkenazic pronunciation of the Hebrew Gehinnom. Well, that's new. We haven't heard that before. This is a new word. Middling people, literally Benonim, which means in-between people, will descend to Gehinnom to be cleansed and to achieve atonement for their sins, and they will cry out in their pain and eventually ascend from there. So what are we starting to get a sense of? What is Gehinna? Purgatory, right? / hell, right? We're kind of like, it's a little bit of both, because Gehinna involves both people who are wicked, who get sent right down, and people who are not sure yet. We'll see if they are able to repent, and they hang out there for a second, and then if they can repent, eventually they rise into Olam Haba. So these are the most consistently formed understandings of Jewish afterlife. Olam Haba is the good place. Gehinna is the bad place. There's a place in Gehinna that's like the less bad place where people hang out until they get to Olam Haba or not. That's a pretty common understanding of afterlife, given that we are in like 400 CE. That is not singular to the Jewish community in 400 CE. Very much a part of absorption of other culture at this moment, which makes a lot of sense when you're trying to think about where did this come from to begin with. There's some debate about who gets a chance to repent and who doesn't get a chance to repent. That's what Beit Hillel is arguing with Beit Shammai about. But in general, they all agree there's a three-part structure. Question? Okay, great question. What a good transition. I love that. Okay, for 1 second, I want to get to the bottom of 5, but hold on. There's one of my favorite lines. Jewish text is often not shy about what it doesn't like. So if you turn to the top of page 8 for 1 second, then we'll go back to 5. Reincarnation is a concept that they have started to come in contact with, and they're debating. They call it transmigration. In Hebrew, they use this word ya'avor, which in Hebrew means to like go from one place to another. And transmigration is this idea that your soul will lift from your body and in some way end up in either just a different body, human or otherwise, or sometimes a better body, right? Both concepts happen. And if you look at the top of page 8, this is Sadia Gaon. We're in the Middle Ages now, and Sadia Gaon is not having it. And he says, I have found certain people who call themselves Jews professing the doctrine of transmigration of souls. Many of them, if you go to the bold, would even go so far as to assert that the spirit of a human being might enter into the body of a beast, or that of a beast into the body of a human being, and other such nonsense and stupidities. So, it's a really gentle guy. You can see that, like, this is where, in all religions, we start to test out, where are the boundaries? What are we going to play with? What are we going to absorb? What are we going to say we can make our own? And then when do we hit something that we say, nope, too much. Not for us. Doesn't fit into our ideology or our theology. And that's really what reincarnation becomes in the Jewish worldview, is that it is considered and ultimately rejected. There is some gray area when we get to Kabbalistic thought about communing with the soul of God, because the soul of God exists in everything, living and inanimate objects. And so there's some softening of that in the Kabbalistic mystical thought about how we share soul with rocks or trees or animals, that kind of conversation. But that is not mainstream. It does not become normative. It exists kind of in the mystical parallel world. Does that make sense? Great. Awesome. Yeah. So we are going to go back to page 5 for 1 second. Actually, let's go to page 6. So we're moving through history very quickly, and I want to still have time for questions. So when we get to page 6, the bottom of 5 and the top of 6, we start to re-engage this question of resurrection. Okay, so now we have this sense that in the afterlife, there's 3 places, but we're still hanging on to this idea that there's going to be a messianic age, and in the messianic age, everybody gets resurrected. So how does that work? What does that mean? And there start to be some debates that I'm lifting both because they're a little bit funny, but also because they're really trying to take it seriously. And so one of the first questions is, does every person who is Jewish, even if they live outside of the land of Israel, which is where all of the texts about resurrection initiate, and a lot of them talk about resurrection on the grounds of the land of Israel, does everybody get to do that? If you live in Persia, do you get to be resurrected in the world to come? And so we have this text on the top of page 6, and it's a debate. And the Gemara asks, will the righteous outside of Eretz Yisrael not come alive at the time of the resurrection of the dead? How could that be? We're promising something. So clearly, is resurrection a good thing or a bad thing in this conversation? It's a good thing. Sounds like a good thing. And then Rav Elazar, God bless him, says, they will be resurrected by means of rolling. Their bodies will roll from their graves until they reach Eretz Yisrael, and then they will be brought back to life. Right? And appropriately, Rava strongly objects to this by saying rolling would be an ordeal that entails suffering for the righteous. Probably they don't want to roll all the way from Italy to Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. I wouldn't want to. And then Abaye says, like, what if there are tunnels that are prepared for them and their souls float through the tunnels to Eretz Yisrael? And it sounds like a ridiculous debate, except that what are they trying to do? In this text, are they trying to expand the possibility of resurrection or constrict it? Expand it. Right? All of a sudden, they like this idea. Not only that righteous get to go to Olam Haba, but that in the Messianic age, the righteous get resurrection. And if they want to hold on to that, that has to be a bigger group of people than just the small remnant that's left in Eretz Yisrael. Incidentally, if any of you know very traditional Jews who insist on being buried in Israel, that's why. Because the predominant understanding is still that the Messiah, if you believe in Messiah, will come in Israel first, and that those who are buried in Israel will rise first. And so there are many people in the Orthodox world who live in Europe, in the United States, who nevertheless, when they pass away, will have in their wills to be buried in Israel on a particular hill in Jerusalem in order to be ready for the Messiah. And actually, even the way the graves are allotted are according to the place from which we think the Messiah will rise, and the ones that are closer to that place are more expensive. And the ones that are not, right, cemetery finance is awesome. And so that's kind of the idea that still exists. All right, the last thing I'm going to leave you with before we have a few minutes for questions is then we get to the medieval rational philosophers. Now, before we even read Maimonides for a second, who is our ultimate skeptic about pretty much everything, loving Aristotle, his entire philosophy is built on Aristotelian physics. That's how he understands the world. If you were to imagine that I said to you, there is a person who is a hyper-rationalist, who is a doctor, who is in love with Aristotle, what do we imagine his position on resurrection might be? Yay or nay? You would imagine that he would say, codswallop, like that's a whole lot of ridiculousness, and let's be scientific, and our bodies don't do that. Except that he doesn't. And interestingly, really interestingly, as the ultimate rational Jewish philosopher, Maimonides goes hardcore into resurrection. Really hardcore. And here are some of the things that he says. First, he says, focusing on the promise of a physical afterlife can be compared to a teacher bribing a student with physical rewards. What is he saying? Should we use the idea of resurrection as a carrot? No. He's saying that deprives someone of doing Torah for its own sake, which is the highest goal. So resurrection must not be understood as a tool. It must be understood as a fact, not to be used as a motivator, only to be used as an eventual historical reality or future reality at that point. So that's interesting point number one, right? He sets his boundaries pretty clearly. He is not, as a rationalist, saying, it's good for the community, like we need it, it's practical, it's pragmatic. He gets that out of the way very quickly. And instead, at the very bottom of 6, page 6, moving into 7, he says, the revival of the dead is from the main fundamental principles of Moses. And there is no religion and no attachment to the Jewish religion for the one who does not believe in it. It's a massively strong statement. It is an essential tenet of who we are. Every man must die and decompose and return to what he is composed of. But the soul ascends, is the implication. The body dies, the soul ascends. And that is a massive debate that we get for the entire medieval period. What gets resurrected? Each of these sources is going to debate a little bit about exactly what it is. Some of them say that we get resurrected physically just as we died, but there's an opportunity for healing. Some people say, some of the commentators say that we get resurrected in our peak physical form. Some people say we have a chance for our soul to be implanted in a better body, whatever that means. Whether that means like another person's body or some newly created body, a little bit fuzzy and unclear. But there is real attachment to this idea that someday we will all live somehow again. So we're going to summarize, and then I'm going to take you for 1 minute into the contemporary, and then we'll do a few minutes of questions. So we started with a little bit of a mess of conflation of afterlife, resurrection, and messianic age. By the time we get to the end of the medieval period, when essentially the Jewish religion and into the medieval time has been formed in its core principles, we have landed at yes to all three. There is an afterlife. It does involve some part of moral structure, judgment structure. We do believe in resurrection, and we believe in resurrection for the messianic age. And it's for everyone, mostly. Some people think just for the righteous, but generally anyone who's in Olam Haba is certainly going to get to be resurrected, and in what form, we're not sure. So we have more clarity, not total clarity, but more clarity. We do believe in all those things. And so sometimes when we say things like Jews don't believe in heaven and hell, that's not quite true. We actually do. It's different than what other traditions have formed. It's less clear, and it's less a part of our everyday understanding of our existence. And the debate, Maimonides believes so firmly in this, and yet believes that it is not something to be talked about every day. It is not something to be used as you need to finish those 25 mitzvot, otherwise you won't get into. It's not his theology. And so that is a different way of understanding it. The last thing I will say is if you look at pages 9 and 10 and 11, the second reckoning of the afterlife, after Maimonides, is enlightenment into denominationalism, contemporary denominationalism. So when in the 1800s in Germany in particular, when through a variety of reasons, the Jewish community splinters into sects once again, and that's why we have Reform and Conservative and Orthodox. Those are the three that originate from Europe. If you have heard about Renewal and Reconstructionists, those are American denominations. They don't exist until the 1950s and 60s, so there's a big shift. I say, thank you. And at that moment, one of the biggest splinters, like it was in the Second Temple period, is do we believe in Messiah bringing about Messianic age? Do we believe in resurrection of the dead? And I'll just share with you that, so I work in a Reform synagogue. The Reform movement rejected the idea of an individual Messiah. That was a massive part of their platform. There is no mystical figure. There is no magic person whose job is it to make this world a better place. Our job. And the Messianic age will only come about if we do all the work. That's the answer that the Reform movement gave. And then, as a result, they changed the liturgy in order to reflect it. And so, in some very famous prayers where we once said, Metim mechaye el, God will literally resurrect the dead, now we say, Chaye olam nata betochenu, eternal life has been planted within us. Really different sentiment. Kind of the same concept, but very different sentiment about who's the actor, who's the agent, how do we get there? So the debate still rages on. You do not have to believe in heaven and Olam Haba in order to say that you are part of the Jewish tradition. Plenty of precedent for people debating. And that's the essential Jewish understanding, is you can be challenging. When people tell me they don't believe in God, my first response is, tell me about this God that you don't believe in. I bet I don't believe in that God either. Let's have a conversation. And that is the way that we think about all of this stuff. So I know our time is up. I'm here for a little bit. If anyone is welcome to come and ask me questions, but thank you so much. It's been awesome, and I can't wait to talk more next week.